Welcome! I am once again back talking about my old friend Alex. I've got Chandler here threatening to knock off my cactus. And yeah, I just want to get straight into it with a couple of stories that I felt like I missed out in that last video from sort of the 2004 era, you know, when we were at school. Now I kind of wanted to chat about. So let's get straight into it. The first story I want to talk about is to do with that band that we had, that I mentioned in the last video, but also to do with a guy who I briefly mentioned, who was my oldest best mate, a guy called Nick. Nick had this ability to rub people up the wrong way, which is kind of ironic in a group of people who came together sheerly out of not being that popular. But for some reason Nick had this thing of people tolerated him, but they didn't get on with him quite as well. And this showed when it came time for us to put together a band, bearing in mind that a bunch of us were very new to what we were doing and had never been in a band before or anything like it. So Nick had just started to learn bass guitar from a guy called Jake. Jake was somebody who wasn't really part of our friendship group at all. In fact, you could actually say that Jake was one of the popular kids who kind of removed themselves from all of the other stuff that was going on in the school. You know, he wasn't particularly posh, he wasn't particularly working class, he was alright, well off, popular for a reason. You know, he kind of got on with everybody, and while he was in with all of the popular crowd throughout years sort of 8 and 9, he was part of a Chili Peppers cover group that was, you know, alright actually. And he was a bass guitarist and a guitarist. He started teaching Nick bass guitar, and around the same time that he was doing that was about the same sort of time that Alex had first showed up in the school. And before the rest of us knew Alex, he had tried to make friends with other people, and at some point he had made kind of an acquaintanceship with this guy Jake. Jake also got on with my other best mate, Simon. By the way, when I mention Simon in any context going forward from here, I am referring to one Simon, and that is Simon W. Yes, where was I? Jake was a guy who knew Simon, he knew Alex, he played bass, and he left his relatively successful Chili Peppers cover group to come and jam with us, who had no idea what we were doing. And he came to the first meeting and then basically said he wouldn't be coming back to the second one, or I think he may have been busy. And Nick, who he had been teaching bass guitar to, said, I'll come along. And I was well up for it at first. This story is going to paint me to be a massive arsehole, and to be fair, I was. I was a teenager, you know, and I was always hanging on to like any grip of popularity that I may have attained at any point. So I invited Nick along, and Alex was game with it, but basically the rest of the friendship group who made up that band weren't. They said, don't tell him he can't come, and when he gets here, like if he arrives at Alex's house, we're just gonna like pretend we're not in. Alex didn't understand any of this. He was just like the new guy in the friendship group, and he didn't understand why we were making like these digs at Nick. And by the way, I was one of them. I was one of these people who was slagging him off behind his back. Like I say, I wasn't the best friend, and this is like the only this was literally my only friend in like year 8 before I met the rest of them. He could definitely rub people up the wrong way, and he had a bit of a crass and dark sense of humor that some people just found really abrasive, but you know, he wasn't a bad person or anything. But what I should mention is Nick didn't like Alex. Nick really didn't like anyone who became like my best friend. If someone came into like close proximity with me in a friendship kind of way, after him, Nick could be quite petty about it. And he, in all my memories of Nick talking about Alex, I don't ever remember Nick saying a nice thing about him, which is sad. But like I say, Nick could be quite petty. So Nick arrives at Alex's house. He comes to the front door, he rings the bell, we all go like that, and Alex's mum goes to answer the door. She comes into the garage and say, "Oh, Daniel, your friend Nick is here. Can you go see him?" And I just refuse. And Nick starts knocking on the garage door, and at some point I remember the garage door being opened. May have been Alex. I actually don't remember who opened the garage door, but everyone, including me, started jeering at him and basically telling him to leave, telling him to go away, and he left quite upset. And Alex came from behind his keyboard and just chased him down the street and basically apologized on behalf of all the rest of us, even though he had no kind of need or place to do that. And he himself had never said a bad word towards Nick in all of this. And he came back and he told us off for the way we behaved. And I don't remember how each individual reacted. What are you doing? I don't remember how each individual reacted, but I remember I felt pretty bad. And I think even Simon felt pretty bad. So, yeah, I mean, that speaks volumes about Alex's character. Alex was always so complimentary of Nick, and Nick was a bit of a twat to him. And to be honest, it was all just petty teenage nonsense. So, I don't know if, like, any of it really held water, if that was genuinely how people felt about each other, but yeah. Now, this next story I want to talk about is a bit more fun. There's a couple of things worth knowing about me. Firstly, I'm a massive fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Have been since about 2001, when I went into a bedroom at my mum's house, and there was this girl that I really liked, who was a few years older than me, and she was up watching SpongeBob SquarePants, and I was like, "You're watching this kids cartoon?" And she's like, "It's honestly the most stoned thing I've ever seen." So I was like, "What?" So I sat down on the end of the bed and watched it with her, and I was like, "Nah, this is actually pretty good." So I'm a massive fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. And the other bit of context worth knowing about is that Simon was dating this girl at the time called Kate, and he was trying really hard to impress her and to show her like how mature and grown up he was, and, you know, go on proper dates and stuff. So Alex is over at my house one day, and I couldn't tell you when this was. Let me just have a look quickly at when the SpongeBob SquarePants movie came out, because it was pretty much around the time that the movie came out. Like, I think it may have been like its opening weekend. Premiered in November 14th, released in the United States November 19th. So yeah, end of the year. So Alex is over at my house one day, and I was asked to look after my little sisters for a bit, and I can't remember what the context was, but I think my parents may have been going to Uckfield, and I remember that I really wanted to see a SpongeBob SquarePants movie. My little sisters, who I'd gotten into SpongeBob, really wanted to watch the movie, and Alex wanted to tag along because he thought that would be quite funny. So me and Alex and my three older sisters all get our tickets paid for by my parents, and we get to go watch the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. We are buzzing, by the way. We go in, we watch it. It is the cinematic masterpiece that it is. I absolutely love that film, even now. And we come out of the cinema and we're just singing like Goofy Goober Rock, and I'm a Goofy Goober, and just talking about our favourite bits of the movie. We go home, drop my sisters off, and then we decide, hey, let's go down to Howsham. So we go down to Howsham and we meet up with our friend Simon at some point. And I remember that Simon was like, okay, you guys are going to have to get out of here now because I'm about to go on a date. Alright. Where are you going on a date? And I think he said he was going to like a restaurant, or he may have been going to a cinema. He himself actually said that he may have been going to a rom-com recently to me when I talked about this story. But it's also possible that he was going to a place called Frankie and Benny's, which was like, you know, an American Italian sort of diner in Eastbourne. And it was across the road from this particular cinema. And for some reason, me and Alex just followed him to his girlfriend's house. And then he was just getting really miffed. I remember he was getting really miffed. And then we followed them both to the bus stop. And then we followed them onto the bus. And then we went to Eastbourne. And then we kind of convinced her along the way, do you want to go watch the SpongeBob movie? Simon was not a happy bunny. We basically completely hijacked his date, me and Alex did. We were just like both the devils on the shoulder, saying like, let's go watch the SpongeBob movie. And so we did. We just basically went along and we watched the SpongeBob movie. And the whole time, I think Simon may have been fuming. I don't even know if he got into the movie or if he was just sat there really grumpy. But there's the four of us there. And me and Alex, we knew exactly what to expect the second time round. So we were just expecting all of like the musical numbers. We were expecting all of the scenes that were coming up. We literally were watching it for the second time that day in the cinema. And when Goofy Goober Rock came up at the end of the film, and we knew it, and we heard those opening chords and SpongeBob like saying, maybe I am a kid. Me and Alex, we got up. We made our way past the front of everyone's legs into the aisles, and Goofy Goober Rock comes on. I'm a Goofy Goober Rock. That bit. We went absolutely ballistic. I think probably getting all kinds of looks from parents and kids. Just headbanging and air guitaring to that whole section. And Simon looking completely mortified, because he had come with us and we were trying to get them both to join us. I don't know if Kate did in the end, but yeah, it was definitely one of the more fun and more ridiculous experiences of my sort of early friendship with Alex, and it speaks volumes about the kind of people we were. Honestly, I could probably describe me and Alex as being a bit like Beavis and Butthead. Not quite as unintelligent, but not a great deal more intelligent either. But yeah, definitely like these two rocker dudes who wanted to rip the piss out of everything, basically. Suffice it to say, I did not get on with school. I have always considered myself to be intelligent, and I love reading, and these days I would even go as far as saying, you know, a little bit of an intellectual in some areas. But the whole system of mainstream education was not for me, especially at that age. And when I was younger, I definitely felt the gypsy part of my personality a lot more. I just wanted to go out on the scrap. I couldn't wait to turn 16. 16 was the legal age back then that you could leave school, even though the year wasn't over, and the school were desperately trying to get me to come back and finish my GCSEs, but I just couldn't be asked. Alex was a couple of months behind me, but I think he didn't particularly like school either, but you know, he was gonna get through it. And this story really is actually again about Alex's mum, because one night I went round Alex's house, and I think it may have been in the February. And in the UK, the way it works is you have I see this all the time, even with my kid at school now, where usually the GCSEs are kind of packed in to the last couple of months of school, like in May and June of like year 11. Year 11 is a bit of a truncated year in itself, but there's always that one GCSE that doesn't fit into their calendar, so they usually bump it forward a bit. And so for whatever reason, the geography GCSE was being done in February, and I wasn't really expecting it because I hadn't been to school for the last couple of months. My birthday had been in the November. Some point in December, I just got up in the middle of class and walked out and didn't go back. And then I'm round Alex's house one night and I seen that he is revising. I think fair enough, you know, that it's going to be a few months away. And then he tells me, oh no, I'm doing GCSE geography and so are you, aren't you? It's like, well, yeah, but no. Well, it's tomorrow if you wanted to go to it. Nah, not really. You're alright. Alex's mum kind of overheard this conversation and was like, well, you got to do your GCSE, Daniel. And I was like, oh, it's starting to feel a bit kind of like on the spot now. But I'm thinking, well, I'll just say no. And then somehow she talked me into sitting down and revising, and basically said that Alex was going to be revising anyway, so I may as well join him. And so me and Alex sat there and revised, and she whipped up a delicious pad thai, which was the first time I'd ever had pad thai, and that was our meal to have on the side of our revision. And then in the morning, she got me ready. She found some school clothes of Alex's to lend to me, and she drove us to the school. And it's just for that reason and that reason only that I ended up with one GCSE when I left school, which was a B in geography. To be fair, by the way, it did cross my mind I could just like leave the school again after she had driven off, but she had spent so much like time in the kitchen that evening, sort of sitting with us and going over our notes with us and making that amazing pad thai for us. No, I just felt guilty about the idea of just walking out. Alex's mum is such a curious person because I talked about her a bit in the last video. He always told me that she never liked me, and he would say things like, no, it was that she did like me until she found out about my Romany background, and then suddenly, you know, she had a real issue with me even coming to the house. But I never saw it. And to be honest, a thing about Alex, going back to like, you know, how petty Nick could be with new friends, I don't think Alex particularly liked it when his friends got on with his mum. And he always had this kind of push-pull thing with his mum. He clearly was very close to her, but certain instance came up that just drove the two of them apart. And I think a big part of it was just being a teenager, to be honest. When you're a teenager, we're all prone to doing arsehole stuff when we're teenagers. That's kind of the crux of this whole thing. After that, I didn't go back to school. And I didn't go back to Alex's house either, especially not around the GCSE time. I remember I did spend a lot of time around Nick's house instead, and if Alex wanted to show up there, he could. Complete side note, nothing to do with any stories to do with Alex, but I remember one time when I actually was around Nick's house and he was going back and forth into the school because he lived near the school, going back and forth into the school to do his GCSE mocks, and I was like just sat on his sofa playing his PlayStation. And I flicked a mini cheddar one time when he was at home in between things. I flicked a mini cheddar into the air and caught it in my mouth. And it went straight down my throat. And if Nick hadn't been there, I don't know like what I would have done. But he started doing the Heimlich maneuver on me and I threw up. Thankfully, that was in between mock exams. Otherwise, I don't know if I'd still be here. After that, I didn't go back to Alex's house for the remainder of the academic year. And actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I went back to Alex's house until the next January. Basically, after I left school, I dropped out of society completely. There's actually a Japanese term for this called hikikomori. I was basically like one of those, just a social recluse who was still going to work, still getting on with my life, just with zero socialization. So it wasn't just Alex. I kind of avoided everybody for most of 2005, but when I did see Alex, he was one of these people who was always trying to get me to come back to school, and then he was trying to get me to just come out and hang out with other people. I remember around this time he was very into a group of girls. Well, I think it was one girl he was into, but he always hung out with her and all her friends from like Polgate. And yeah, they were very into anime and stuff, and that was actually a big part of how I started to embrace anime a lot more, was when I went and hung out with them with Alex. But that was, again, only 2 or 3 times. It's amazing how like these small interactions when you're a teenager that can be so fleeting can end up having like these long-term effects. I think I'd gone for the like Christmas and like New Year's holidays. I'd gone to stay with my birth mother in Ashford at her house, and at some point I think I ended up texting Simon. I think it was Simon. I couldn't say for sure now it was, but I ended up texting somebody, and he said, oh, by the way, Alex is having like a big thing at his house for his 17th. And I ended up there. And I tell you, it was the biggest party I've been to in my life, actually, to this day. Like I mentioned in the last video, Alex had quite a big house, and despite his kind of odd humour and his sort of offbeat personality, Alex had this ability to just attract a lot of people. And so I don't know if it was just the promise of, oh, by the way, massive house party at a massive house, or if it was because everyone there was friends with Alex, but like loads of people turned up. I'd say like, 50 or so people were at this party, and I had like a lot of alcohol and a bouncy castle and a lot of food and people in the hallway playing bongos and teenagers just pairing up with each other for like the night. Not overnight, if that makes sense, but definitely like getting off of each other in all the corners of the rooms. I myself actually ended up with somebody that time, and I don't even remember what happened to Alex, but the next thing I do remember was that at some point towards the end of the night, Nick and this other guy who I didn't have any clue who he was, a guy called Jay, got into a massive thing where Jay started chasing Nick down the street and got Nick on the floor in like a headlock and started pummeling him. And I'm there with Nick like dude, it's gonna be alright, I'm gonna get you out of here. And everyone else is trying to pull Jay off him, I think. And that was the only time of that night I can actually remember speaking to Alex, because Alex then told me, oh, like, this is my friend Jay, like, he's not normally like this. Apparently that whole thing started because Nick started flirting with some girl in an outrageous way. I couldn't tell you for sure. It's all hearsay, to be honest. But yeah, that was Alex's 17th, and it was a massive thing. It was so big, in fact, that I actually came back into society for a short while after that. I considered going back to school. I considered going out on nights out with people. I started going to other people's parties and showing up there. It was actually fun to think of it. There was this one time where I emulate an Axl Rose. I went out and bought like an old tartan skirt, like a kilt type thing, and I started wearing that as well as a bandana. I was wearing a bandana a lot back then. And so me, Nick and Alex, of all people, rocked up at a 16-year-old's party just basically to drink their booze that they'd managed to get. And we must have necked quite a bit. Like, we drank loads and it barely touched us. And then meanwhile, we're seeing like all of these like 16-year-old emo kids who are sort of 2 beers in getting absolutely wrecked. This is going to become apparent anyway. We were all massive drinkers at this time. For different kind of reasons. I was probably the biggest drinker in my life when I was about 16 and I was a social recluse. I'd just go to work, come home and then neck as much cider as I could stomach. Alex, on the other hand, would go on to develop a bit of an addiction to various things, and you know, alcohol was just the first of many things that would become a big part of his life. But yeah, we were barely affected, and we were just there like watching all these teenagers fall over each other, and at some point we just thought, yeah, this isn't our scene, and we just left. And so yeah, this just became like a temporary thing. But then at some point I think this was the 7th of January was the party, and by the 20th of January I was already done with society again. I just realised, you know what, it's not for me, and I walked out again. But after that, me and Alex started to hang out a lot more. During the time that me and Alex weren't hanging out as much, and I wasn't really hanging out with anyone socially from like my school days, there was this guy who started showing up to my house called Graham. Basically, our next door neighbour was this old woman who really stank, right? So I just remember that I was quite nasty about it. Yeah, clearly she was just very old and just had that kind of old people smell, but it was very, very strong, and I was really nasty about it. And let's face it, like, so all of us, because we were teenagers and we were arseholes. But an old friend of hers was this guy who was a bit younger than her, who had met her when he was working like St. John's Ambulance, I think. And his son was about the same age as Alex and me. And, you know, I think literally his birthday was like 2 weeks after Alex's. So just by sheer coincidence, we ended up making friends, even though I decided that I'm not going to be friendly with anyone. When Alex came back into my life in 2006 and I started hanging out with him again, I introduced Alex and Graham, and the two of them got on quite well, actually. Not so much that they started hanging out with each other outside of hanging out with me, because Graham really, I think at this time in his life, his entire life was St. John's Ambulance. He clearly was very passionate about it. And I didn't go out socially. But one thing that both of us and Alex could agree on is that we liked heavy rock. We really liked heavy rock. So around 2007, me and Alex start going to some heavy rock concerts. And I think the first one we went to, which was my first time going to a concert since like an ABBA tribute act as a 10-year-old. And my first actual rock concert was Thin Lizzy and Deep Purple and Styx. By the way, Thin Lizzy, greatest band. By the way, Thin Lizzy is one of the greatest rock bands ever. I don't care what anyone says. Thin Lizzy deserve so much more attention than they get. Okay, I will talk about that in another video at some point, I promise. But right now, let's just continue. Because we went to see Thin Lizzy and Deep Purple and Styx. Alex was quite excited to see Deep Purple, of all things, but also kind of excited for Thin Lizzy. And I remember we got there, this was at the Brighton Centre. I was really excited about seeing Thin Lizzy. And then I think the first song they played, I couldn't tell you for definite, but I'm pretty sure the first song they played was Jailbreak. You got that big opening chord and a high ringing note. And Alex has made me go and buy him like a hot dog, and it cost like £6, which was a lot of money back then. That's like a hot dog that costs like £11.50 now, right? He made me go and buy him this hot dog, and he ate half of it, and I missed the first half of the first song, and I wanted to get right to the front because it's like Thin Lizzy, it's my favourite band at this time. And yeah, I remember just being really fuming with it. He chucked half of it on the bloody floor. Oh my god. Or he put it in the bin. He might have put it in the bin. I don't remember. I remember he just threw half of it away. It really upset me. But yeah, it was such a memorable night anyway. You know, going to see my first rock concert and you know, getting to understand what Styx is all about, because I really didn't know anything about Styx apart from Cartman's version of Come Sail Away. But yeah, good night. And then the next time we went to a concert was this thing later on in that year called Vibes from the Vines. So for context, I grew up in Howsham, but later on, some point right around the time I met Alex, I had actually moved to a town called Heathfield, which is about 7 miles north. And near Heathfield, there was a small village called Horham. Horham is a tiny little village that you just drive through on your way to Heathfield or to Tunbridge Wells, if you're going that way around. And not much else. At one point, it did have like a big cider factory that made like this amazing cider that I used to love, called I think Merrydale. I used to just get like big 75cl bottles of that and just neck the whole thing in like one sitting. But yes, Horham decided one year, and it turned out to be this particular year when me and Alex and Graham were looking to go to concerts. They decided to put on this event called Vibes from the Vines. There's a lot of vineyards around Horham for wine, and they wanted to put Horham on the map. So some bright spark decided to make this sort of big concert out in like the fields. Wait, I just realised I've made an accidental pun there. They had Gary Moore headlining. That's the accidental pun. He's got a song called Out in the Fields, which I really wish he'd played, but he didn't. He did play Parisian Walkways. Again, these are two Thin Lizzy songs that Gary Moore had played on, or rather Gary Moore songs that Phil Lynott had duetted on. I don't know how you want to count it, but basically they're songs I know from Thin Lizzy's discography. And they had Gary Moore headlining. They had GMT, I remember that first year, which was Guy McCoy Torme, and I recognise the surname Torme because, like, I'm a guitarist, right? I read a lot of guitar magazines. Torme is Bernie Torme, a guy who infamously stepped in after Randy Rhoads died to join Ozzy Osbourne. So I recognised that name, and I was really looking forward to seeing them, and it was like punk blues kind of mix. Good sound, I liked it, but I was well excited to see Gary Moore in particular. The rest of the day was like a mini festival. It started at about 11 in the morning or 12 or thereabouts, and it went on until after 11 at night. And like I say, it was just out in the middle of the countryside in East Sussex. So a bit of a strange place to be seeing Gary Moore for the first time. I actually ended up going to that concert twice. We went to it the next year as well, and I couldn't remember which events happened in which year. I remember that GMT went at the second year's events, but beyond that I don't really remember much else, and the reason why is because me and Alex got wasted to the point that all I remember from the concert was seeing the bands and accidentally putting sugar on my chips that I got from like a little burger van and realizing that sugar on chips is actually pretty sick. But according to Graham, and I say this with the full acknowledgement that this is purely hearsay. Like, so much of what I say is hearsay at this point, right? Especially when I'm talking about a time when I've been out drinking. But according to Graham, me and him actually met Gary Moore, and I shook hands with him, and I have zero recollection of any of this, which means that either Graham is making stuff up, or potentially that I met one of the best blues guitarists to come out of Britain when I was in such an inebriated state that I imagine I was just slurring my words completely and making a right twat of myself. I wonder why he doesn't mention Alex in this story. Did Alex already, like, fuck off? But yeah, it was cool to see Gary Moore. And it was even more cool to see Thin Lizzy, fronted by Scott Gorham, another one of my favourite guitarists. And no amount of Alex throwing away half a hot dog could take away from that. I've still got the t-shirt, actually. Right, next time I will try to move on to stories that involve a lot more of 2007 onwards. And I hope that I haven't forgotten anything, because this is quite a chunk of time that I've talked about where it doesn't really involve Alex as heavily, because I was just so wrapped up in my own depression. But yeah, we'll get on to a lot more of that kind of crap. In the meantime, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. As always, I know that this video is probably going out to people who knew Alex. But if you found your way here and you found any of this interesting, then do check out my other video talking about Alex, because a lot of this will build on previous videos. Like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel for more of, you know, me just waffling about stuff like this, as well as retro gaming content that I have been doing a bit this year, and music discussion that I will be getting back to. I promise, I keep saying it, but I'm just waiting for certain things to come up. And with all that said, have a good one.